You've been looking at a lot of young male syndrome recently.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be one of the most important memes of the coming decade. And both of us have been talking about it, at least in part, for maybe like 3 or 4 years, I think, online. But it's picking up steam. What have you learned digging deeper into the modern conception of young male syndrome and how it's sort of manifested? What have you learned?
Yeah. Well, so the young male syndrome, this constellation of traits that are associated with a certain period of time in young men's lives, typically the teens and the early 20s, heightened levels of risk-taking, reduced self-control and inhibition. If you look at rates of criminality, for example, they tend to peak at around age 19. And this is true regardless of culture and society, sort of all across the world in non-industrialized hunter-gatherer communities, and all the way up to sort of wealthy and rich societies, that it's the young men. If you look at who's committing the crime in that society, it's inevitably going to be sort of men aged, say, roughly 15 to maybe 24. Even things like so this is just in the U.S. context, likelihood of being hospitalized for punching walls. There was a nice graph I saw, and I posted it online, of the sort of the distribution of young or men, just men in general, being hospitalized for, and it's all concentrated again 15 to 24. It's like 10-year-olds aren't being hospitalized for punching walls, and neither are 60-year-olds. It's all that sort of young male group, and I'll admit I've punched walls before.
Yeah. Did you see Alexander Datesyk posted a quote tweeted an image this morning that was a mother asking how she could help her son, and it was just a photo of his bedroom wall, and this bedroom wall was just hole after hole after hole, and then the door had a hole in it. And it's like, I mean, it looked like a sufficiently flimsy American house that the hospitalization risk was quite low, but that the decorating risk might be quite high.
Yeah. That's in that case. I mean, that sounds like it would require some serious
intervention,
intervention, some serious treatment. What I find interesting is, especially for young men, that this is, I think, an expression of the young male syndrome, is when a young man experiences some sort of usually like a minor injury, and then their immediate response is to lash out. So like I saw this with some of my friends where like maybe I know something simple like they accidentally poke themselves in the hand or something, and then their immediate response is to punch something. So they hurt themselves and they're pissed, and then they punch something. And I think that this is basically a misfiring of this kind of evolutionary impulse of if an intentional agent hurts you, it actually is advantageous to fight back, right?
Anger response,
right? Exactly. So if I don't know, like the cactus plant stabs me, maybe punching the wall is unwise. But if you do something to upset me, and then I immediately respond physically, that can actually be an adaptive strategy. So I think like that is this is speculation, but this is what I think is going on there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense, right? You're injured. Let me break my hand now, right? It makes no sense. So, so the young male syndrome, sort of reduced inhibition, increased risk taking, criminality, risky driving. If you look at who's arrested for drinking and driving, who gets into the most auto accidents, who is the most likely to be killed simply crossing the street. Yeah, so I think it's men are twice as likely to be killed simply crossing the street as women. So there are so many sort of different factors here. And there was actually one on the seatbelt point. There was an interesting study which found that men are less likely to wear seatbelts when they're accompanied by a male passenger relative to when they're sitting by themselves or when they're sitting with a woman.
What do you think that's saying?
I think that is one possibility here is essentially the attempt to signal toughness. That you of course, like there's a lot of interesting work here and a lot of discussion and debate around this, because of course men want to signal to women, and we want to signal that we're strong and can acquire resources and all those kinds of sort of bedrock findings in evolutionary psychology. But then we also want to impress other men too. You want to show that you would be in the ancestral context, you want to show that you would be good in a violent conflict against a rival
strong
coalition,
compatriot.
Or if you're big game hunting, you want to show that you're strong. And so I think the way that it might manifest itself in the modern age is I don't need to wear a seatbelt. I'm going to show my friends and my mates like I don't need to wear this.
That 2-ton rocket ship going towards me hasn't got shit. We both became fans of that David Putt study. That was able to predict the number of sexual partners based on not female ratings of attractiveness of male faces, but other male ratings of toughness of the same male faces.
Super cool study.
That the women's attractiveness rating had basically zero predictive power, but that the man's toughness rating had like quite a good bit of predictive power.
Yeah.
Was it you that taught me, or was it Dunbar that taught me about men's street crossing in the presence or without the presence of women?
That was probably Dunbar.
Right. Okay. So this study is so much fun. So they got crossing the street is really interesting because it's a relatively discrete variable. You have distance of vehicle from street crossing, and then you have like the presence or lack of presence of a female. And men, the difference in how close the vehicles would get, and men were prepared to cross the street in the presence of a woman was like a third of what it was when there was no women around. Like, look at all of this, surplus fitness that I have. I'm going to cross the street while this car's only 15 yards away from me or whatever.
Yeah. All that, I think, the young male syndrome is, I think it sort of depends on the context, but it is most likely to sort of be expressed when you're trying to impress women or when you're trying to impress men. Yeah, again, so I don't think it would necessarily impress young women, that you're driving without a seatbelt, right? And I think maybe on some level guys understand that, but with it wouldn't necessarily. It's not so much that you're impressing your friend when you don't wear the seatbelt. It's that if you do, you might be mocked or made fun of, or that what are you wearing a seatbelt for? That kind of, especially like 19-year-old guys, that kind of thing. And so it's not so much trying to look tough, but just not to look weak.
Very interesting. Okay, so but young male syndrome specifically seems to be worsened amongst sexless, dispossessed, rambunctious young guys coalitioning together in small groups to go and set shit on fire and push over granny.
Yeah. And that's it's when a young man is isolated sort of by himself, there's only so much damage he can do, but it's sort of the risk becomes exponentially greater sort of as he sort of partners with other men and they collaborate and start to plan. And so, this is, so you had this interesting term about the sedation.
Male sedation hypothesis. Yeah, it's in a study at the moment with Buss and William. They're testing it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, because I remember when you first told me about that, something that had come to mind is, I had friends, I mean, this is, sort of back in the day, I don't know if people still play this game, World of Warcraft, but I remember I had a couple of friends who like lost years of their life to this game. And they were like, and they the way that they spoke, as when you told me about this, I thought like, these young guys, this was 18, 19, this was years ago, but they would say like, all right, I gotta hop off the phone, I'm going on a raid. I got a raid scheduled, like, well, you don't have a raid scheduled. You have, 7 hours of sitting in your laptop chair.
Computer game scheduled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he's like, I'm going with my other internet friends and we're going to go, raid this castle or whatever they do in this game. And I could see that, this is a sort of an expression of that or an example of that of, just young guys who ordinarily might be out causing trouble and instead they're just online. And that's how they do it. I saw this funny post on Twitter. And this guy, he said something about, back in the day, if you were like a hyper curious young man, you'd basically start like trying to document the like visible differences between the mushrooms right around your house. And today what they do is like try to collect all the rings in a Sonic game, like speed run a Sonic game.
Yeah.
And so, I think the virtual world is sucking in a lot of angry and aggressive men, but we may also be losing like that sort of the pattern matching, sort of systematizing young men too.
Yeah. Well, it's managed to hijack an awful lot of the status-seeking, coalitional, curiosity, adventurous behavior that young men, throughout all of history has been kind of acclaimed for. You look at my favorite example of the solution for young male syndrome was Portugal in the 1800s.
What did they do there?
The first son was allowed to, there was an imbalance in the sex ratio.
Okay.
And they knew that if son 1 married, because he was the oldest son, but son 2, 3, and 4 perhaps weren't permitted to marry and there weren't enough women to marry, that this was going to cause problems. So they just put them on galleon ships and said, go, pioneer the new world. Away you go. So they literally exported the young male problem by putting the men on ships and giving them this sense of adventure, channeling their aggression outward against either a new world or political enemies or whatever it was. And I think that there is still a question. Vincent came on the show, mutual friend came on, and he's been researching and he says, every single time that we have high rates of sexlessness and blah, 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 we have an increase in associated violence, and it's just at the moment, and someone may tell me that I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to be there in the data, right? We have incel, black pill ideology. There was this period maybe about 2 years ago where they were even claimed to be a domestic terror threat, I think, incels.
Right.
They were a terrorist group, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
Where's the, show me the violence, show me the uptick in the violence. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been an uptick in murders and stuff, but I think a lot of that can be attributed to
something else.
Yeah, exactly. Like the receding of police from inner cities.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if so on its face, it seems silly, right? That the incels is a domestic terror threat, but I wonder if they were just if they were actually familiar with the research on the young male syndrome and the sort of historical I mean, maybe I'm giving them too much credit.
I think
but they were sort of anticipating the possibility, and they're just sort of getting out ahead of it and saying, well, you have a lot of young, sexless, angry young men, and historically that's been a group that's been dangerous. So let's just designate that label on them. But I think, in the modern age with technology, with video games, with porn, with scrolling phones, I mean, I've seen sort of research on what young men, like jobless young men do. And most of the time they're scrolling their phones, playing computer games, watching porn, overeating junk food.
You see Nicholas Eberstadt's work on that?
I haven't. Is this related to the men
it's
without
like men not working or whatever it is, whatever his book was called.
Yeah.
Just awesome. But it's like some insane percentage of men are NEETs, not in education, employment, or training, but also are prime working age. Like I think it's 22 to 50, and it's this unseen because unemployment rates are relatively low in America, but hiding in that data is a very unusual cohort of men who are electing to be unemployed. Yeah. They're living on social welfare in one form or another, or still living at home, spending an insane amount of hours per year playing video games. And while they're playing video games, 50% of that time is either on prescription medication or whilst taking weed. So you just have it's like, okay, here's the big data. Okay, well, what's that? Like, how's this constituted? Who are the component people that make up this data? And you go, hang on a second, like what's this chunk? It's like, I think it's like 8 million or 14 million men, prime working age men, electing to retreat from the employment market. Now, we put this episode up, and a lot of guys that are maybe a part of this cohort, are tangential to this cohort, commented, and the sentiment very strongly was, why should I contribute to a world which doesn't value me? Why am I going to work to get a 5'3", 210-pound woman who's already gone through 2 marriages and got 4 kids? Just very despondent. Evidently, guys who don't see much future for themselves. Yeah. And it was really eye opening because largely the comments on Modern Wisdom tend to be pretty personal growthy, agentic, highly sovereign, upwardly mobile, etc. But this episode blasted out of the algorithm into the wider internet, or maybe it got shared on some forums or whatever. And it was very, very interesting. And I got to see I got a window into this world, and these guys didn't seem very happy. Yeah. They were maybe comfortable in their nihilism, but I don't think that they were particularly fulfilled.
I mean, they may be comfortable when they're young, but I'd be curious whether sort of as we move forward, decade or 2 decades later. I mean, it's one thing to be a NEET when you're 19 or 23, but when you're 43 or 51 and you're single, maybe you've never had a girlfriend and you've spent most of the last, several decades just playing video games and
wallowing in collective misery on forums and stuff.
Yeah, I think I mean, now in the modern age, we have so much freedom. You don't have to work anymore. You don't have, if you don't want to, or if you live in a modern rich society, you can collect sort of extended unemployment or maybe live with your parents or find ways to, very few people now, very few young men are sort of literally starving or having to steal food to survive. And now if you want to do something difficult, you have to make the choice to do it rather than sort of be pressured sort of by external factors. I saw this TikTok video. I'm not on TikTok, but people sometimes send these to me. And I saw this one. This young guy. I think he was in the Army, U.S. Army, and he was just sort of walking through his barracks, and he was asking these other young guys, these young recruits, if you could talk to your recruiter right now, what would you say? And these other young guys were like, I told him to go fuck himself, or like, God, this sucks, or why did I do this, so on and so forth. And I'm watching this, I'm like, I know exactly what he's talking about because I was there. I was, I'd enlisted.
You were Air Force, right?
I was in the Air Force, and I remember, especially like the first 2 years are just awful. Like once you get a bit of rank and a bit of responsibility, like once you go through the training,
stop eating shit.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're like, then you're okay. But the first couple of years really suck. And so I knew like these were all very young guys. They were still sleeping in bunk beds, and I would have said the same thing. I'm glad that TikTok didn't exist back then, but I'm watching this and I'm thinking like, these guys don't understand, right? In 5 years from now, they're going to be glad that they ate shit for however many years and they went through this experience. And I think a lot of young guys won't even go that far. Like they won't even enlist, which is fine. Everyone has their own sort of make your own choices. But in that moment, I understood that like, this sucks. Why did I do this? Like, this is awful. And then you go through it and you can sort of, in hindsight, go back and say, like, it was a character forming experience. It was good for me. Like, I was an idiot when I was 19 and I probably needed a bit of that structure, or a bit of that discipline. I needed to have my ass kicked a little bit. And I think, like you don't, but, and those guys volunteer to do that, right? You have to choose to undergo that experience.
So you've already pre-selected for someone who's got the agency to get moving.
Yeah.
I had this idea. Every single morning for over 3 years now, I've started my day the exact same way, which is with Element in water. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and it is the best hydration drink that I've ever found. It tastes fantastic. It's super refreshing. Orange is just the most OP flavor in the world. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it helps to play a critical role in reducing muscle cramps and fatigue. It regulates your appetite, it optimizes brain health, and it helps curb cravings. They're also the exclusive hydration partner to Team USA weightlifting and relied on by tons of Olympic athletes and everyday high performers all around the world. Also, there is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy where you can buy a box completely risk-free, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you a refund during an unlimited duration, and you don't even need to return the box. That's how confident they are that you'll love it. Element are giving away a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box if you go to the link in the description box below, or drinklmnt.com/MW. That's drinklmnt.com/MW.
Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip with Rob, you will love my full-length podcast with him, which you can watch right here. Go on, tap it. Tap it.